incredibly fortunate to somehow have wangled my way into this position. That's how I see it, honestly. I don't have, I mean, I'm sure I have as much pride as anyone else in all kinds of different ways, but as far as what we've achieved here is, it just isn't a matter of pride. I don't know if I can explain that to you, but it's a way, when I first came here and I bought 150 acres of land and people said to me, wow, how fantastic, you've got 150 acres of land, that must feel really good. And I didn't really understand what they meant, because always my feeling had been that you can't own land. I never felt I owned this land. You can't own those rocks and everything that you've seen out there. You can't own that. I mean, I was just, by some miracle, a caretaker of this for some short period in the history of this planet. And I just didn't have that sense of ownership at all. I think if we go up to the top of these rocks here, we'll be able to sit down. So I'm just going to push the gorse down a bit for you here, because there's enormous holes going down, maybe even hundreds of feet through the cliff here. And I'd really rather that none of us fell in one of those. I was building it out of the rubble that came out of the hole that we dug. We dug a hole about the size of a tennis court, and then we put a roof over it. I used the stone to build with, and then when I'd run out of the stone, I used the rubble to mix with cement and make my own blocks for building. And I made those blocks in plastic kitchen basins, and I had 40 plastic kitchen basins, and then I would each day smear engine oil all over them, and then mix this mix of cement and rubble from the hole there, and fill those basins, and then turn out the previous day's blocks. So I was making 40 blocks a day, and then using those blocks to build with. We'll cobble all of this here eventually. That's the effect. And there's the little blocks we make.
These are the lunch boxes.
These are lunch boxes. Well, I'd been living in London throughout the 60s and was very much involved with the scene that was happening in London. We really believed that the world needed to be changed, and perhaps we could change it a little bit. And then, by about 1968, things were getting a little bit out of hand. The whole thing had become totally commercialized. And most of my friends had said, more or less, to hell with this, and they'd dropped out and gone to find places to live in the country. That's Harriet leading me on the first horse we had when we first came to Ireland. And we couldn't get a car in, so we had a horse and cart, and that's the horse. Well, we first came here in 1973 from Scotland, and we were looking for a place to start a centre, and we'd looked all around the southernmost peninsula, and I'd had just a little two-liner from an estate agent saying 150 acres of rough coastal land near Castletownbere. We nearly didn't come, but then we thought as we were in Castletownbere we might as well have a look. I kept remembering this sort of dream that I'd had when I was a child of a place where I wanted to establish a community. I wasn't sure even whether it was a spiritual community or a community for artists, but a place for people to live. And this was a sheer mountainside with a terrace, and then a cluster of houses in the middle of the terrace, and a cliff below us, and then a vast plain with a little pile of hills in the distance. And this picture had been with me for years. And then, as we came up to the top and turned the corner, there was this vast bowl of the Atlantic in front of us. And then the horizon, the sea started almost at our feet, and the horizon up very high, and the sky, and we just stood there really dumbstruck. I mean, neither of us spoke, and we just stood there. What I saw there was exactly this picture that I'd had in my head for all those years. So immediately I thought, this is it. And Harriet and I, when we sort of came to, we just sort of ran down through the fields and we were laughing, and it was just so wonderful. My wife Harriet was very much moved by this thought that it was actually, we called at that time self-sufficiency, and it was the idea that perhaps we could become self-sufficient in some way, live slightly outside the established order, grow our own vegetables, keep our own animals, and not be totally dependent upon a society that we felt was going in the wrong direction. And that's where I used to milk the cows in there, and there's a little low window. Can you see a low window in that end of it? And I used to look through that window. That was almost at floor height, that window, right down near the ground. So I used to sit there milking the cow, gazing down the bay, all across the sea, and then to the hills, and then thinking of another ocean beyond it, and more hills, and then I used to think of London and Piccadilly Circus and all that stuff. Just to remind myself that there were other beings on this planet, because it really seemed as though there was no one in the rest of the universe apart from me at that time. I had another reason, which was actually pursuing this path of establishing a Dharma center, a retreat center, a place for peace and meditation. And while perhaps the world, it was very valid that people should come and try and find a way to live outside the system and take care of their material needs in that way, I felt very strongly that the whole world had lost its spiritual direction as well. She died at the age of 44, yes, I mean incredibly early as far as I was concerned, which was in 1993. We'd just finished the centre over there, and we'd just made it a charity, and a few weeks before she died, she signed the deed of trust establishing the place as a charity, and I was very happy that she had at least seen that come to its conclusion. Of course, since then I've wished so much that she would have seen this place. Actually, she saw this conservatory. When just before she died, I got as far as building this conservatory, none of the rest of the building, but this was finished. And she actually came in here 3 days before she died. She walked up the cliff and looked around, and I'd finished planting. She hadn't been in here for about 6 months, and I'd got the roof on. And she looked around and said, "Now I see the point of it." Harriet's death made me all the more determined to carry on, to complete the dream which she and I had shared. And when it was getting towards winter, and I had to face undoing her clothes cupboard, and then I was burning some of her old clothes and things, and around that time, of course, difficult. There was never actually a time of despair. I mean, it's difficult to describe it, the feeling of bereavement, feeling of loss, of sort of emptiness, but not of despair. And when I was feeling like that, sort of in the background all the time was brewing away the fact that I was really going to make it work for Harriet, you know. And I think in the material world, as the world has become more materialistic, then I suppose, and we're clinging on to possessions, I suppose our most favoured possession is our own body, isn't it? And then would be the bodies of our loved ones. So to let go of those becomes increasingly difficult as we become more materialistic. And I suppose within any spiritual tradition, I guess, you learn not to be so grasping onto these things. I've noticed how, I think everybody's probably noticed how after the absolute horror of what happened in Tibet, I mean, it was as bad as what was happening in Germany. And the Tibetans never talk about it. They never make a fuss about it. I've never heard the Tibetans complaining about it. Sometimes you can sort of screw some facts out of them, but they never actually moan about their lot at all. And they have this incredible ability to accept what's happened. And I think that actually grows in you on any spiritual path. You are able to accept things more easily. Once I make my mind up about something, that's it. I made my mind up, I enter it wholeheartedly. And I think I think that would be the same about what kept me going, that once I've had the idea and I have settled on it, it's difficult to turn me from my path because I just enter into it completely. It became my life and there was never any question. There weren't any alternatives. So how I kept going was, actually, there was never any alternative. This was what I was going to do.